Welcome to the German Marshall Fund of the United States. My name is Heather Conley. I'm president of GMF, and we are absolutely delighted to host a really timely and important conversation with NATO Deputy Secretary General Mircea Geoană. We're going to talk today about the future of the European security architecture, the road to the next NATO summit next year in Vilnius, Lithuania. And again, could not think of a better person to really dive in and have that conversation than the Deputy NATO Secretary General. Mircea Geoană has had an extraordinarily distinguished career. Some of my personal favorite highlights: he was the Romanian ambassador to the United States from 1996 to 2000. He was Romanian foreign minister from 2000 to 2004 during the historic NATO enlargement, which welcomed Romania into the alliance. Following from that, he has served with great distinction as a parliamentarian and serving ultimately as the president of the Romanian Senate. But NATO was very, very fortunate to be able to pull on Mircea Geoană's extraordinary expertise to become Deputy Secretary General beginning of October 2019, an incredibly consequential moment for the alliance. So, Mr. Secretary General, welcome to GMF. Welcome to this conversation. And I'm going to ask for your permission, because we are colleagues and friends. I'm going to call you Mircea. I'm going to use great American informality, or I will always call you Mr. Secretary General. But Mircea, welcome to this conversation. And we welcome all of our audience to this conversation as well. Please feel free to send us your questions using that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We really want to bring you into this conversation. So Mircea, many welcomes to you, and I would love to jump into this conversation and begin the journey to Vilnius. But let's start in Madrid. Let's start the last few months and talk about enlargement. That was the big news, obviously, at the Madrid summit, welcoming Sweden and Finland into the alliance. You were in the room when the negotiations were happening. So I'd love just to help us understand the conversations and the momentum to that decision. And then I'd really love your sense of where are we going now? Two NATO members, Hungary and Turkey, have yet to approve the accession protocols to welcome Sweden and Finland into the alliance. Really would love your thoughts on this forward, because we hope this has to be accomplished before the Vilnius summit next year, surely. The Finnish foreign minister just said, Baltic Sea security is at risk the longer this ratification process moves on. So I'd love your thoughts on that. If we can jump right in, get started, let's talk about enlargement.
Thank you, Heather. It's a privilege to be with our GMF friends, and we've been friends for years, and we'll continue to stay friends for many long years. I remember vividly Madrid, and I have to say the Secretary General Stoltenberg himself. He invested enormous political and diplomatic skills. And before the summit itself started, there was ample, I think, hours and hours and hours of bipartite and tripartite conversations, the president of Turkey with the prime ministers of Finland and Sweden. And for that matter, this very morning, we had here in HQ in Brussels, the new Swedish prime minister. Speaking of our democracies, and leaders come and go. And we have reconfirmation from the highest level of the new Swedish government that the memorandum agreed upon by Turkey, Sweden and Finland is valid. And of course, that will create all political conditions, Secretary himself, myself, to make sure that we have these new two high value new allies inside the alliance. Of course, there are things still to be worked out, but we are confident that we'll have Finland and Sweden joining our ranks in the near future, and the full ratification process will be completed. I think we have a small problem with the sound.
Muted myself, exactly. Sorry. Do we have a time schedule do we have a time schedule for, has the Hungarian government provided information to NATO about when they believe that they will complete the accession process? Do you have a sense of timing from the Turkish government?
There is not a clear indication in timeline, but there is also, the fact that we have already 28 nations already having had ratified. It's in itself an indication of the importance of the subject for all allies. Of course, we are respectful of domestic procedures, of the politics of this. That's a fact of life. But again, we are confident that we'll have the two new allies amongst our ranks in the near future. And of course, we encourage all sides to continue to work in delivering that objective.
Thank you, Mircea. Let me, obviously, one of the highlights also of the Madrid summit was the address by President Zelensky to the entire summit. There's this very, very impressive picture of him on the Jumbotron speaking to the group. And since Madrid, on September the 30th, we had President Zelensky signing documents that were asking for accelerated accession to NATO. And clearly this is very difficult politically, but help us understand, how does NATO process that request as we move towards Vilnius? Because there will have to be conversations about what this means.
Yes, we did receive, and I think it's not a coincidence that the letter signed by President Zelensky, the Prime Minister, and the chair of the Supreme Rada in Kiev. It was 3 signatories from all sides of government to Secretary General Stoltenberg, asking for us to expedite the membership request of Ukraine. Of course, it was just after the illegal referenda organized by Russia in the occupied portions of Ukraine. So that's a political logic to this political gesture from Ukraine. And we say this, and you remember we've been in the trenches of enlarging NATO and having Europe whole and free for almost our lives and careers. And NATO is here to reconfirm that open doors is valid. The decisions in Bucharest at the summit in 2008 are valid. And we know that Ukraine will fulfill, when the time will be ripe for Ukraine and for all of us to become part of the Euro-Atlantic family. Of course, we are now at war. And we had a very interesting discussion with the Defense Minister Reznikov when we had a defense ministerial meeting just the other day. It was a working dinner. And of course, we allies exchange views. And of course, their opinions, some allies saying that we should try to do things faster, others saying that we are still at war and we have to find a moment when this will not represent another escalation of a war which is already complicated. And of course, we have to find the right time and the right moment. But in between, we have to do one thing, which I think is not more important than membership, but is vital for Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. It's here to help Ukraine. And I think this is something that we do. And speaking of the meeting with Oleksiy Reznikov, he also was part of the contact group, support contact group for Ukraine that happened in HQ, separate from NATO, but in NATO HQ just last week. And the support for Ukraine continues. I had a call with General Manager of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, the other day, talking also about, it's not NATO, but there's also economic and financial support needed by Ukraine. Look at the devastation of the electricity infrastructure in Ukraine. So I think the aspiration of Ukraine to be part of this alliance is active, is real. The timing needs to be addressed in a way that will make consensus function, and in between, absolute total support for Ukraine in the just fight to defend their land and to prevail in this war.
Mircea, let me just pull that thread a little bit on the energy security. Certainly something that NATO has looked at very carefully. Center of Excellence on energy security, critical infrastructure protection. I'm just wondering if NATO is giving thought on the way to the Vilnius summit to have a much more enhanced posture on protecting critical infrastructure. Again, we're just receiving reports. We don't know that an undersea cable may have been cut in the UK to Shetland. We know that there was, some communications disruptions to Svalbard. We obviously had the Nord Stream 1 and 2 disruption there. Is NATO leaning forward and seeing how it can provide critical infrastructure protection to major undersea cable and communication nodes, as well as energy nodes for NATO? The explosions for the Nord Stream pipelines happened very close to Danish territorial waters, not in them, but close. How does NATO respond to that?
Of course, we do respond as individual allied nations, and you've seen what Norway has been doing, what Sweden and Denmark have been doing, what the UK and US have been doing. But also SACEUR, our Supreme Allied Commander, is stepping up his vigilance measures according to his authority. And we have now, we doubled the number of NATO ships in that part. We have, active measures from the sky and from beneath, the seas to make sure that we have more intelligence about the risks that might happen. So that's a critical infrastructure that we need to defend, because that's vital to our resilience and to our economic and financial and societal prosperity. So yes, we are doing a lot, and the foreign ministers will be meeting in Bucharest at the end of November. We'll also have a dedicated discussion on energy security, and in general, resilience is becoming more and more a prominent feature of where NATO is looking into. So we'll have more of NATO's role in defending critical infrastructures undersea, cables and pipelines, but also from space. We have also critical infrastructures coming from space that could be disrupted. And that's why the security, approach that NATO takes on defense and deterrence is becoming more complex. Deterrence and defense on the eastern flank, as we have discussed, but also taking a more holistic view of a broader definition of security. And we are seeing Russia escalating also horizontally. And this is probably part of a decision, as they're escalating in Ukraine, in trying to basically cripple the energy infrastructure in Ukraine, they also could be tempted to escalate horizontally in cyber, in hybrid, in this kind of critical infrastructure. So we are very vigilant when it comes to this kind of critical infrastructures.
Does this reach a certain point where, really, again, it is every NATO member's responsibility for resilience, for managing the individual crisis, but does this reach a cumulative effect where, honestly, it begins to become an Article 4 consultation, where there's so many points here where allies really do need to have a common understanding of attacks against, as you said, this whole range of critical infrastructure?
As you know, we have decisions and doctrine in NATO that a severe attack, we don't define what a severe cyber attack or a severe attack from space could represent, because a little bit of strategic ambiguity is always useful, because then you put yourself in a straitjacket and you cannot respond properly. But severe attacks from cyber and space could trigger Article 5. So this is something that we are looking very seriously into. Of course, not every incident, not even, let's say, serious incidents could lead into that direction, but we are becoming very vigilant. And also I see something very interesting and useful amongst allies, because you're right. There is a sort of a tendency to say that resiliency is a sort of a national or subnational prerogative. And in federal countries like the US or Canada or Germany or others, there's also subnational level that you have to talk to states. But you also say something which is quite obvious, and that's why resilience is such a big portion of the strategic concept, that you cannot stop Nord Stream 1 and 2, it's going between many countries. It's transnational, affecting ally security. So we are now in the midst of really doing much more work on cyber, on resilience, on space, on new technologies. And these are intertwined security risks. And if you see those, you also see them also in national security strategies, like the one was recently launched by the US administration.
Well, Mircea, you're going exactly where I wanted to go in our next set of questions, is really talking about NATO's strategic concept and operationalizing it. Clearly, it was a major milestone that came out of the Madrid summit. These are processes that are very challenging to get 30 members to agree. It seemed easier to do that in Madrid, which I think speaks to the focus of this geostrategic moment. But I would love your thoughts on, again, how will this be operationalized? And for me, what came through the messaging in the strategic concept, and you can argue with me, is really the essential nature of Article 3 of the Washington Treaty, meaning it is the members' responsibility for territorial defense and territorial security. And I found that had a lot of similarities to the US national security strategy when mentioning allies, that allies needed to assume greater responsibility for their own defense. So how does NATO operationalize that concept of assuming greater responsibility for one's own defense while they're looking at collective deterrence and defense capabilities?
Madrid was just nothing short of extraordinary in terms of the breadth of the decisions, in terms of the depth of the decisions, and in terms of the scope of the decisions. And the strategic concept is just, a very succinct, reflection of how we look at international and European security now in the next years. And we are starting to execute the marching orders of our leaders. That's what NATO is such a useful organization, because once our leaders decide and have consensus on something, then we start delivering. Of course, the many decisions in Madrid don't have the same timetable for implementation. The Deterrence and Defense for the Euro-Atlantic Area, DDA, which is part of our deterrence and defense massive adaptation, will take place it's taking place as we speak, and will become even more active on the way to Vilnius. We'll see exercises at brigade level in many of the current battle groups. We'll be seeing pre-positioned stockpiles on the eastern flank. We'll be seeing more cyber, more space, more intel on the eastern side. So these things are implemented in a relatively short time span. Other things take longer, like digital transformation of NATO. That's something which is a lengthier process, because this means changing many ways in which we operate, or partnerships for that matter. Some of the partnerships we have, I speak of individual partnerships, like the one, let's say, to the south and to the east, to Georgia, to Moldova, to Bosnia and Herzegovina, to many of our partners. We have some things that we can deliver now. We do for Bosnia, we do for Moldova, because they need our help, for Georgia. But for Mauritania, for others, this will take longer. And we have to also be resilient and perseverant in doing these kind of things. So what I can really reassure our audience today, that once we have a decision by our leaders, NATO is delivering on those things. Some of them faster, some of them a little bit more complex politically sometimes, not always easy. But once we have marching orders from our leaders, it's much easier for us to do things. I know Vilnius will be an important stepping stone in the implementation of our historic summit in Madrid.
And a great reminder about our audience, please submit your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to bring you into the conversation. Mircea, sticking on the strategic concept for a moment, the very new element of the strategic concept was certainly the language related to China. And on paragraph 13, it notes the People's Republic of China's stated ambitions and coercive policies challenge our interests, security, and values. That was very new. That didn't exist. in the 2010 concept. Obviously, Xi Jinping just gave a historic speech at the 20th Party Congress where national security was mentioned over 50 times. And as you noted, and you're responsible for NATO's partnerships, whether that's NATO Japan, NATO Australia. How is NATO headquarters conceptualizing, a more thoughtful NATO policy and approach to the Indo-Pacific, and specifically addressing what seems to be an emerging threat to the Taiwan Straits?
NATO has been so successful over the last 3/4 of a century because what I would call our strategic agility to adjust to changing strategic circumstances. That's why we are so successful. Because even if we're a big machine and now with 30, soon to be 32 members, decision-making process and consensus making is a little bit more complex politically, but in the end, we always reflect changing, strategic environment. And if I'm thinking not only of the previous concept of 2010, but the first language in a final communique of NATO on China was in 2019 in December in London. And if you look to the way in which the China language and the China thinking in NATO has been evolving, is of course important. But it's not because NATO is obsessed with China. Because the rise of China in itself is a major shift in global affairs, international security, in supply chain, in resilience, in many other things. So NATO has this sort of a strategic agility and adaptation in our DNA, and it's only normal for us to look into this. Of course, if you read a little bit the new US national security strategy that we read attentively, you can imagine here in NATO, I've done it again this morning, paragraph by paragraph. You see a little bit, of course, more detailed, fleshed out things about the competition with China. We're also reading attentively what President Xi said at the Congress. And for me, as a political person, I think for my military and intel colleagues, there are many other paragraphs on the long speech that triggered their attention. But for me, there was one paragraph that is basically explicitly saying that China is proposing to human mankind a different pathway towards modernization. So for the first time, they're speaking of a system of norms, an organization of the world that is basically theirs. So we are in, our concept says, era of great power competition, and I would say a systemic challenges. Does it mean that China is the only threat we have? Russia is a big threat, terrorism is a threat. We have many other issues that we have to deal with. But the rise of China is a monumental shift in global affairs, and NATO, through our own DNA, we are adjusting to a changing world and taking measures to adjust to this changed nature of world affairs.
I certainly think policymakers are making that adjustment, but in GMF's recent Transatlantic Trends public opinion survey, it was very clear that of the 14 countries that we surveyed, Europeans were not supportive of a more, shall we say, confrontational approach towards China. I think there was clarity about Russia and its risks to European security, but how do you manage again, public opinion on taking a more proactive role in that, in NATO's posture in the Indo-Pacific?
Listen, Heather, before this barbaric war started, if you would have asked many public opinions in Western Europe, and probably also in the US, about many things, they would have responded differently. And of course, not every country is America. And geography matters, and commercial and economic interests do matter. But I see a sort of a strategic awakening to this new brutal world that we are living in from all allies, irrespective of geography. So I'm confident. But of course, keeping the regional character of NATO. We are a Euro-Atlantic, a transatlantic organization. We're not a global organization per se. That when it comes to China and finding the right balance between our interest in Europe, the interest in Africa, in the Middle East, and global interest, will find the right balance. And I hear in many corners, sometimes in Europe, this thing that America is pivoting towards the Indo-Pacific. And no, America needs its alliances more than ever. We need America more than ever. So I think we'll be finding the right balance between making sure that we keep Europe secure. A new architecture for security in Europe is in the making, but also understanding that some of these challenges are common, and we have to confront them together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's certainly some voices here in Washington that are suggesting that our American resources need to be solely concentrated in the Indo-Pacific, that in many ways our European focus is a distraction. So we have those politics, and we're going to talk a lot about politics at the end of this conversation on both sides of the Atlantic for sure. Mircea, let's turn now to, again, one of the most prominent elements of the Madrid summit, which, and thank you again for great questions that are coming from our audience. Folks are certainly pulling on, because there was a real shift, you mentioned it earlier, moving from what I would call a tripwire defense of enhanced forward presence to really thickening much more of a deterrence and defense posture. So moving battalions to brigade size, the pre-positioning of equipment. Again, are you sensing that allies are really able to make these additional contributions, or we know how strained capabilities are and readiness is across the alliance? We know how difficult it was even to get that promise to get a multinational brigade to Latvia in particular. There were some challenges. There's some behind the scenes wrestling to get those decisions. Are we going to be in a better place in Vilnius, or are we just going to be talking rhetoric and not seeing evidence of additional boots on the ground, additional equipment? You mentioned exercises, but I'm talking about, persistent posture here.
As we speak, there are French tanks moving to my home country of Romania. I'm seeing in Latvia, in Lithuania, in the Baltics. I'm seeing in Bulgaria, under Italian leadership, the new battle group moving up. Of course, we have to continue to make sure that the promise and the decisions in Madrid will be fulfilled until Vilnius. But as we see from allies, they're determined to deliver on that promise and on that commitment from Madrid. So I think we will be in a pretty strong position by Vilnius in delivering on these issues. But again, Vilnius is just another point, and the more fundamental change in our deterrence and defense posture and culture is coming from DDA. Because again, the eastern flank is so important, helping Ukraine is so important, but in the end, we are in the business of protecting 1 billion people from all directions, from all domains. So that will be, I think, the more important question. There's no question about our determination to defend our allies from the east. I see determination from every single ally and delivering on the promise. But we have to make sure that, number one, we learn the lessons from this war that Russia started against Ukraine. NATO is now probably more useful than ever when it comes to giving our defense industry predictability about the future. Because we ask them, produce more, hire more people, get more credits from the banks. And they say, okay, but are we sure that this will not be a short-lived moment of need, and then we'll go back to business as usual? And that's why through the NATO defense planning process, which is giving predictability and volume to the industry. So I think that the real question is not if we'll be doing enough for our eastern flank. I think we'll do what is needed for them to be protected. But I think in the end is the idea, which is the kind of resources and mixture of capabilities that we need to be able to defend every inch of territory from all domains, from all geographies. That's the business of NATO. And of course, sometimes a crisis or a war is creating, of course, more pressure, more need to do something in one place. But I want you to stay assured that here in NATO, and I think America and all the allies are also looking to the to the new comprehensive way to do deterrence and defense for all allies from all geographies and from all domains.
Absolutely. And Mitch, let me just pull on that thread about industrial production, because that certainly was a strong message that came out of the defense ministerial. We saw out of Madrid, one of the decisions was a defense innovation accelerator. So help us understand, because stocks are becoming critically low for some NATO members, particularly those on the eastern flank, because they have been incredibly generous in providing Ukraine the necessary capabilities to fight. But the defense industry needs that long-term, clarity of production lines. How is that going? And will NATO continue to try to press allies and industry to replenish stocks, as well as to provide the needed capabilities to the Ukrainian military?
We have to ramp up production and to give predictability to our industries, because private sector is providing almost everything that we need to defend our nations and also to help Ukraine. And speaking of lessons learned, it is clear that the level of stocks that we had in all allied countries, including the US, the massive, American military and the stockpiles, and of course for the other allies, are not sufficient, and we should try to find predictable ways for us to ramp up production and give clarity to our industries. And I mention again that NATO is probably the only place when you can look to, let's say, the next 10 years or so, and have an indication of how much each ally is ready to invest in defense, what kind of defense needs and planning processes for NATO are needed, what kind of new rules for stocks. But probably we have to look into that thing, because now we are in a different kind of period. So yes, I do believe, and that's what we do here, Secretary General, our armaments directors from all allied countries, they are meeting regularly, and we try to give a little bit of predictability. When you speak about Diana and innovation, that's, of course, another strand of work, which is about what's the right balance between the lessons learned on deterrence and defense from the war in Ukraine, and our needs to continue to invest in new technologies also for defense and security. And again, I say that NATO is again very useful in harnessing the innovation ecosystem across the alliance, because from small Estonia all the way to Silicon Valley, there is talent, there are ideas, there are startups. So that's the idea of having this innovation ecosystem. We have a small innovation fund. Of course, we're not transforming NATO into venture capitalists. It will be a small fund, but the idea is just to make sure that the SMEs and the startups that need a little bit of help to test in our test centers and accelerators their ideas, a little bit of money to cross the death valley between an idea and showing that the model is marketable and commercial. And this is where I believe we can really create more synergy and more volume across the alliance. So for defense industry and also for innovation industry and technology, NATO is a unique platform to bring our allies together, and also Australia, Israel, Japan, South Korea, partners of ours that are also high-end. And Sweden and Finland joining our ranks will add also a very rich innovation ecosystem in defense to NATO.
No, absolutely. Mircea, before I leave sort of the defense and deterrence posture on the way to Vilnius, one of our audience had a very specific question to just make sure for your comment on regarding the increase of number of high readiness forces to 300,000. So is that going to be a deliverable? Will we get there by Vilnius?
Listen, for the first time in the history of the alliance, we activated after February 24th the gradual response plan. So our current defense planning mechanisms. And SACEUR has today, as we speak, more than 40,000 troops under his direct command, and hundreds of aircraft and ships under his direct command. And also something that people sometimes do not think that much, because it's not that obvious, that also the new battle groups in the east, which before were basically sort of an arrangement between the host nation and the participants, will be under Nato command and under Sakhar's command. So when we speak about this kind of new defense and deterrence architecture, we are speaking of basically a new level of the way we do this kind of things. So when it comes to readiness, we have now a commitment to have up to 100,000 troops ready in the first 10 days, and then up to 300,000 in the next up to 30 days. Of course, we have to make sure that these are available and always ready to do that. But we are confident that the lessons learned from Ukraine will teach us that we need this kind of high readiness forces, and of course sequenced in a way that will be appropriate to the new environment in Europe.
I think the understandable criticism when I traveled to Latvia last month. I mean, I think the images from Irpin and Bucha, do cities and villages have 10 days? Would they see the incredible atrocities that are being committed? And I think that delay is just so difficult. It takes that long to get those reinforcements. I mean, I think it's a legitimate concern about how quickly forces.
Heather, let me not contradict, but say something that in Madrid, our leaders took a fundamental decision to move from tripwire to forward defense. That's massive. That's a huge shift. So when we speak about the new battle groups and brigade level or divisional headquarters or pre-positioning stocks or NISR and cyber and space capabilities for our forces, we are saying that we are defending from second zero our allies. I'm saying that for a prolonged issue, there is, of course, a sequencing of mobilizing additional resources. So I understand that the nervousness and the anxiety of allies from the East, because they're also exposed and they have also a memory. And also, you're right, Bucha and the other things are indicating that trouble is here. But I want to reassure them and all of us that we are now in a different architecture of deterrence and defense. And from the very first second of an incident, we are there to defend all allies and every square inch of allied territory. There's nothing that you wait for 10 days before people come and support you. We are there from the very first moment, and then we reinforce rapidly in order to make sure that we prevail in any eventual conflict.
Mircea, one of the questions from the audience talked about concern about Belarus. Obviously, Russian forces and have been shifting their posture. Does that shift the flanks posture? Do we need to thicken because of shifts of Russian forces in Belarus?
Belarus is already complicit to this atrocious war. We see these public statements that up to 9,000 Russian troops would be deployed in a sort of a joint structure in Belarus. We see other things. We also don't see an indication of Belarus having decided to really get directly involved into the conflict in Ukraine. But of course, there is also a shift in the balance, strategic balance of the region. Also, to our Baltic friends, the arrival of Sweden and Finland is also shifting the balance in the Baltic region. So they can be, and all allies should be reassured that we are planning prudently and preparing for all eventualities. So Belarus continues to be a complicit to Russia, and we are taking every measure to make sure that they are taking into our broader strategic definition of security for the Euro-Atlantic area.
Mircea, before I move to sort of that future security architecture and the politics of NATO that I want to get to, I want to pull two really insightful questions from our audience, very much focused on the strategic concept. So you've got great readers out there of the strategic concept. The first question is about promoting human security. And again, those images from Bucha, from Irpin, the fact that the Kremlin has targeted civilians for strategic effect. Is NATO thinking about how to posture itself to protect citizens, that human security factor, differently because of the tactics that they are seeing in Russia? And then the second question, and I know we spent a lot of time at Madrid, my colleagues at the Munich Security Conference, Atlantic Council, and the German Marshall Fund, talking about externally climate, talking about this great power competition. And we have a question about, again, climate is a big focus. Certainly, Secretary General Stoltenberg has made this a very prominent feature. And again, could you help us understand in a more granular way, what is the thinking about operationalizing that component of NATO and climate change?
On human security and women, peace and security, again in Madrid, and in the concept we have important transformational decisions, and in everything we do, we take these two important parts of the work as a transversal piece of work. So it's not just a political thing; it's also military, operational. It's across the board. So, and of course, these massive crimes against civilians, and the fact that many allies and many international institutions that have competence in looking into war crimes and documenting that, we are convinced that the ones who have committed these crimes will be brought to justice and will be held responsible. Of course, in a system of law, in a system of international, rule of law dominated issue. So I'm heartened to see our Canadian allies and our British allies and our Polish allies and many others, and from the Baltic countries, sending special police investigators to document these crimes. And we are fully confident that the perpetrators will be brought to justice. This might take some time, but there's absolutely no way in which such crimes should not go unpunished. Of course, in a system of law, in a system that functions as it should. Now, when it comes to climate change and security, Secretary General, you're right, puts a lot of emphasis on this. We have basically two components. One is the carbon footprint of our armed forces, and we have to really make progress. And of course, we also rely again on industry to provide fresh technologies, because we have to find the right balance between making sure that our carbon footprint of our armed forces in NATO countries, and also in NATO as installations, what we have as an organization, is reduced, and we are part of the effort to make sure that we are investing in saving our planet. There is also a security dimension of climate change when it comes from instability, mainly from the south. Competition for resources, the issue of food security, energy security. And this is something that can also fuel terrorism and instability and fragility in the neighborhoods of NATO. So both of these issues, climate change and security, and human security and women, peace and security, are top on our agenda. And this is something that we continue to do very energetically in the period ahead.
Mircea, let me ask and pull on a question from our audience. So as we're helping the Ukrainians document these atrocities, clearly Iranian drones and missiles are perpetuating those atrocities, and we see growing Russian-Iranian cooperation. How do we hold Iran accountable for their contributions to this illegal war?
Of course, no country should, support in any way this kind of barbaric war. And it's clear that we call on Iran to stop being part of this atrocious war. And we've seen an increasing number of Iranian drones used by Russia. We'll see if there are other things that Russia might get in order to compensate the emptiness of their stockpiles from Iran or other places. But it's clear that we have to be exceptionally firm. NATO as NATO, but also the EU. I'm encouraged that the EU is putting additional sanctions on Iran. This is something that is affecting also regional stability in the Middle East. We've seen also some interesting conversations in Israel about this issue. So together, all of us, the ones who say for the right reasons that such a war should not take place and should be stopped, and everyone's helping this war is to be held accountable. The same thing applies to Iran.
Well, just on this issue of Iranian drones, NATO has suggested that it needs to hasten counter-drone technology. Obviously, this is going to be a way of warfare in the future. How is NATO stepping up in that, in developing and providing to the Ukrainians that essential counter-drone technology?
Also in Madrid, our leaders decided to have what we call a comprehensive assistance package, a CAP package for Ukraine, including the topic that you have addressed, Heather. So as we speak, allies are contributing to this, and we are delivering anti-drone systems to Ukraine. Of course, NATO does a segment of this. There is a need for air and missile defense systems for Ukraine. We are encouraged at the fact that recently Germany and Spain have sent high-end, interesting. You mentioned Slovakia earlier, and we continue to help Ukraine. NATO in the segment that it's the assistance package for them. But if you look also to allies and partners, they're also providing air and missile defense to Ukraine, including in fighting and shooting down the Iranian drones.
Israel is a very important NATO partner. Disappointment because they have not been more forthcoming in providing important military assistance to counter and provide that air defense needs for Ukraine. Are you open? Obviously, again, you're responsible for NATO's partnerships. Opening any doorways to encourage Israel to be more forthcoming?
That's a sovereign decision in the end. We cannot, not even from NATO to allied countries, and less so to partners of NATO, we can tell what they should or shouldn't do. And of course, Israel is a country with unique capabilities. They have also a unique situation that they have to defend themselves all the time. And this will be a decision that they have to take. And I know there are conversations with Ukrainians. There are also other factors that they have to look into from a regional perspective. But I think for Israel, the fact that Iran is so openly using their drones in the war of Russia against Ukraine is an indication that this war is something that is affecting the interest of everyone.
Absolutely. Well, in the last few minutes that we have, I'd love to turn to my favorite subject, politics of NATO allies, which sometimes support the strengthening of NATO, sometimes work against it. The first question I want to ask, I think this is your quote, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you believe particularly Central Europe, the Black Sea region allies are going to be, quote, co-authors of a new European and international system. So I'm going to translate that to say that the center of gravity of Europe feels to me that it's shifted east, that the dynamism, the focus, you can feel that in NATO, you can feel that in the European Union because of the focus of the war. How does this shift, if you agree with me or not, how does this shift work in the future? How will Central Europe, potentially the eastern flank, which of course, again, is from the Arctic to the Eastern Mediterranean, how did those countries shape the future of the European security order?
Listen, I remember the speech that Chancellor Scholz gave in Prague, I think just a few weeks back. And of course, there's a big conversation in Germany about the consequences of the war. That's a big country in Nato, in the EU, in the world, and that's a very, very important transformation of strategic culture and the consequences of this new reality for them. But the Chancellor said in Prague, and I quote from memory, that the center of gravity of Europe is moving eastward. And probably it was something to tell our Czech friends and allies, but I think he meant something more than just to say the obvious. That Russia, by its own decision, they are decoupling from Europe. It was not our decision. They basically, by this starting this war against any norm and against any logic, and against their own interests, by the way, they are basically decoupling. So in a way, this part of Europe is becoming, as a result of this new reality in Europe, more relevant strategically. This is clear. Now the question is, would this part of Europe will become more relevant also economically, politically, technologically? And it's also up to the countries in the region to use this fantastic chance for them not only to be relevant strategically, because they are. From the Baltic, from the North Sea, all the way to the Eastern Mediterranean. But I think there's an invitation for countries in my part of Europe, I'm coming from Romania, to really use this unique chance for them to be co-designers of this new architecture, because there is a need for them, we need them. I think our Western European and of course North American allies encourage that. Also in NATO EU, we see fresh energy in what we do together. So I think that the center of gravity, not only in security terms, is moving towards the east in Europe, towards Central Europe, but also the economic and political one. And that's great news for all of us in Central, Western Europe, or of course across the Atlantic.
So the opportunity is there, whether it is seized or not is a question mark. So Mircea, does Russia have a place in a new European security architecture, or by their very acts, at least for a generation, as you said, they've taken themselves out of it. They have, the atrocities, the unrelenting violations of international law just require that your European security architecture now has to be built without them. Or is there any space to allow them in? That was a question from one of our audience members.
Listen, I think sometimes history is a good place to try to get not answers, but at least some indication. And I think in Russia's history, there was always a sort of a pendulum between a European direction and a Eurasian. And also in many of the circles in Russia today, even before the war, there are many people saying that the place of Russia is in Eurasia because the center of gravity of the world is moving there. You have there Central Asia and China and India and many other places. So I just don't know how long Russia will decide to basically opt out from Europe, because today is their decision, is not ours. So I cannot say how long this kind of self-inflicting pain by Russia on its own citizens, on its own interest in the end. They're getting weakened from this confrontation. So I cannot say that Russia will not be part ever again of a European system of norms and why not even cooperation. But when and if they decide that they go and come back and play by the rules of the UN Charter and also behave and engage as a responsible international stakeholder. So when they do that, I see no reason for us not to reconsider how long this will take. It's up to Russia, it's not up to us. For the time being, we are standing by Ukraine. For the time being, we are continuing to tell Russia that this is something that is counterproductive and dangerous. we defend our allies, and it's up to Russia to decide if their place is in Europe or anywhere else.
You keep saying for the time being. Are you growing increasingly concerned about voices in the United States? Congressman Kevin McCarthy just stating very recently that full support for Ukraine is in question because Americans are hurting. Are you concerned about some voices that may be part of a future Italian government that are overtly supportive of Putin's vision of a new European and international security architecture? For the time being, feels very temporary to me. And this is a long slog. NATO has to prepare itself militarily and politically for a decade of dramatic instability, internal to Russia and external to Russia, what its causes. Are you concerned that we don't have the durability that is needed to actually win this conflict?
Heather, I know America well, and I know the American political system. I know the leaders, and I have to say that I'm confident that America will continue its bipartisan support for NATO and for our policies. For one simple reason, it's the best national American interest to have strong alliances and have partnerships around the world. So, of course, politics and elections, that's a fact of life. Look at the UK. The way in which a new government was, in a way, put in a delicate position. Speaking of the Italian elections, we've seen from Mrs. Meloni the statement that she's very strongly supporting NATO. Of course, you have to see the government coming to place. So, as a politician and as somebody who has been doing a little bit of politics in my lifetime, I'm less concerned about these issues because we have one thing in common, all of us, Democrats and Republicans, social democrats and conservatives in Europe, whatever we are. We know that we cannot afford to get weakened out of this very difficult testing period of our resolve. And being democracies is not easy. Our public opinion has difficulties with high energy prices, with inflation, with mortgage. That's a severe thing, and we have to take it into account because we are living in democratic societies. And I think we can, and we will find the kind of resiliency, democratic resiliency, for us to say that in the end, the fact that we are giving up the Russian blackmail on energy on Europe is tough for 1 or 2 winters, but will be benefiting all of us in Europe after that because we'll be changing our economic model. That helping Ukraine is not only a matter of defending Ukraine, it's also a matter of telling Russia and anyone else that will have the resolve to resist temptations by others to go in such adventures. So, not going to be easy politically and democratically, but I'm relatively confident that we'll stay the course and will be with Ukraine for the long haul. That's my deepest conviction as somebody who knows American, European, and Romanian politics for some years.
Well, and we not only do we need that confidence and that reassurance, we need our policymakers to speak directly to their citizens to underscore exactly that. It's critical for political figures to lead, not necessarily always follow. I'm going to use the last 2 minutes here to end on a very sobering note, and my apologies for that, but I would be remiss if I didn't use this opportunity to talk about perhaps the most sobering of conversations that we've been having around the NATO table, and that's because of Vladimir Putin's nuclear saber rattling. Is the alliance clearly a nuclear alliance, meetings of the nuclear planning group? Is NATO fully prepared should the Kremlin do the unforgivable and use tactical nuclear weapons in this conflict?
As you mentioned, Heather, we are a nuclear alliance, and as long nuclear weapons will exist, we'll stay like this because that's part of our deterrence and defense. And by the way, we are hardened here in NATO, and all allies are hardened that the nuclear posture review of the US is indicating consistency and predictability. And of course, we are very much condemning this irresponsible rhetoric a nuclear superpower like Russia and Soviet Union before, they know that this is something you don't play easily in terms of using this. Having said that, we're also not seeing, in terms of intelligence, any signs for Russian preparation for using such things. But if they eventually would do, this will be, of course, crossing a major line, or will be consequences. And of course, we're not here to say which consequences, because ambiguity is always useful. But I can tell you that we are, of course, looking very attentively to this thing. And we still consider that this is an issue that Russia should not use and probably would not use. But vigilance is always important.
Mircea, a wonderful hour of rich discussion with you is always an hour well spent. I think for me, the hallmarks of this conversation, the importance of resilience, confidence, unity, strength of purpose. These are the words that NATO uses. And we know that we have a long road to Vilnius. In some ways, an hour feels like a day, and so many monumentous events that are happening. But it goes back to the hallmark of what NATO is. We are stronger together. We are NATO. Thank you, Mircea Geoană, Deputy Secretary General of NATO, for joining us, and we look forward to future conversations with you.
Thank you, Heather. I thank the GMF for the remarkable work you're doing for all of us.
And a great day to our viewers. Thank you for joining us.